Welcome to tune into the Voice of Truth with Rivyona podcast. We're diving into a really heavy situation today. What's happening to Christians in Syria right now?
Yeah, it's a truly alarming story, and it's one that's not getting nearly enough attention.
I mean, we're talking about one of the most dramatic religious exoduses in modern history, and most people haven't even heard about it.
Exactly. And you see these headlines and these reports coming out, and it's just heartbreaking.
One report in particular really caught our eye. It quoted an aid worker who's been on the ground in Syria for years, someone who was there through the massacres in March of this year. And they said flat out, the situation is worse now than under ISIS.
Wow, that's a pretty stark statement coming from someone who's seen it all firsthand.
Yeah, and it really made us stop and think like, okay, we need to understand this better, because if it's worse now than under ISIS, we're talking about a whole new level of crisis.
I mean, think about it. Syria, that's where Christianity has some of its deepest roots.
It's like ground zero for the faith. The road to Damascus, the Apostle Paul's conversion, it's all right there.
Yeah. For almost 2,000 years, there's been this vibrant tapestry of Christian communities in Syria: Greek Orthodox, Syriac, Maronite, Melkite, Armenian Chaldean. They've all been a part of the fabric of that society.
They've contributed so much to Syrian culture and history, it's really hard to overstate their importance.
And now they're facing this huge existential threat.
It's hard to even grasp the numbers. Before the war began back in 2011, there was something like 1.5 million Christians in Syria.
A significant population for sure.
Yeah, and now estimates put that number as low as 300,000.
Some even say it could be as high as 600,000, but still.
Either way, we're talking about an 80% drop in just over a decade.
That's not just a decline, it's a potential eradication of a 2,000-year-old presence.
And all of this is happening against the backdrop of this massive political upheaval. The Assad regime finally fell in December 2024 after 24 years in power.
It was a long time coming, and a lot of people thought it would be a turning point, but
But now there's all this uncertainty and fear, especially among Christians, because who's in charge now?
it's Ahmed al-sharaa, also known as al-Golani, and his group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS.
And they have these historical ties to al-Qaeda, which doesn't exactly inspire confidence when it comes to protecting religious minorities.
Right, and you can see why Syrian Christians are feeling so uneasy. One of them said, in general, many Syrians are afraid that the change of control might have a negative impact, especially for Christians like me, the uncertainty.
You can definitely understand that fear, right? They've gone from one authoritarian regime to another with a whole new set of unknowns.
And this new regime has a very different ideology, very different priorities, and that raises a lot of questions about the future of religious freedom in Syria.
So what are the biggest challenges facing Syrian Christians right now? I mean, we're talking about physical safety, economic hardship, religious persecution, displacement.
Yeah.
I mean, where do we even begin?
Well, let's start with the most immediate threat, their physical security. Christians are often described as the least armed group in Syria, which makes them incredibly vulnerable in a country that's awash in weapons and armed groups.
Right. They don't have the same kind of communal protection that some other minority groups have, like the Alawites, who tend to live in more concentrated areas.
Exactly, and that makes them easy targets, and the massacres that happened in Latakia and Tartus back in March really drove that point home.
Yeah, those attacks were horrific. I mean, over 1,300 Alawites were killed, including 132 in a single day.
And while they were the main targets, Christians also suffered casualties and had their homes and businesses destroyed.
It shows you how quickly violence can escalate and how it doesn't discriminate when it comes to religious or ethnic lines.
And on top of the threat of violence, there's the economic hardship. The war has just devastated. The Syrian economy sanctions have crippled the country, and most Christians are struggling just to meet their basic needs.
It's gotten so bad that churches have had to shift their focus from spiritual guidance to providing humanitarian aid. They're distributing food and medicine, offering shelter, whatever they can do to help people survive.
It's a desperate situation, and it's forcing many Syrian Christians to make an impossible choice: stay and try to endure the hardship, or flee and join the millions of refugees who have already left the country.
And then you have the issue of displacement itself, people being forced from their homes, sometimes multiple times, as different factions fight for control of territory.
There was one story about 500 Kurdish Christians from Afrin who were displaced to Aleppo, and now they don't even have a safe place to worship.
It's just heartbreaking, and the impact on neighboring countries like Lebanon is immense. They're already struggling to cope with the influx of refugees, and now even more are pouring in.
Karam Abi Yazbek from Caritas spoke about the strain on resources and the desperate need for more humanitarian assistance.
And all of this is happening while religious persecution and discrimination were still running rampant. I mean, the new government under al-sharaa made these promises about protecting all Syrians, but
But the reality on the ground tells a very different story.
we've heard reports of jihadist clerics in Idlib openly inciting violence against minorities. One quote that really stood out was, "A knife must be put to their throats. This is their medicine."
That kind of rhetoric creates a climate of fear, and it makes it much easier for people to justify violence against those who are already vulnerable.
And it's not just words either. Churches are taking extraordinary measures to protect themselves. They're hiding valuable religious icons. They're keeping a low profile because they're afraid of being attacked.
And converts from Islam to Christianity are facing even greater danger. Majid Kurdi from Freedom Seekers International said that militias are actively hunting them down.
It's a really dangerous situation.
Yeah.
And it's one that often goes unnoticed because it's so hidden.
And to really understand the human cost of this crisis, we need to hear the personal stories.
One Syrian Greek Orthodox Christian named Adi Owis shared his experience after the March massacres. He was actually living in Damascus at the time, but he still had strong ties to his community.
And he was able to confirm the deaths of 10 Christians he knew personally during that period of violence.
He said it was a time of incredible fear. He couldn't sleep. He was constantly worried about what would happen next.
And he talked about how vulnerable Christian homes are to theft because they're seen as easy targets.
He said it's a house you can go to without any resistance because they know that Christians don't have arms.
It's just heartbreaking to hear how they're being targeted simply because of their faith.
There was another account from a man named Emil who witnessed the March massacres firsthand. He said he saw both uniformed soldiers and armed civilians participating in the violence.
And he said that local mosques were broadcasting calls for jihad, which just fueled the sectarian hatred.
It's clear that the violence wasn't just limited to a few rogue actors. It was more widespread and it had a level of organization to it.
And we can't forget about the Kurdish Christians in the northeast. They're facing threats from both internal Syrian factions and Turkish-backed mercenaries.
There have been reports of kidnappings and forced conversions.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very complex situation.
And even those who manage to escape the violence and flee to Lebanon are facing immense challenges. They're living in poverty, they're struggling to find work, they're often discriminated against.
It's like they can't catch a break.
And yet, even in the midst of all this suffering, there's still hope, there's still resilience.
Adi talked about how Christians are good in the art of peace and how they're committed to nonviolence.
And Patriarch John X. Uzigi has been calling for an end to the violence and for a peaceful resolution to the conflict.
It's amazing to see that kind of strength and faith in the face of such adversity.
So let's talk about the March 2025 massacres, because they seem to have been a turning point in this crisis. Could you walk us through what happened?
Well, it all started on March 6th with an attack by forces loyal to the former Assad regime. They targeted troops from the new government in the coastal regions.
And that initial attack quickly spiraled into this horrific sectarian violence.
It was concentrated in Latakia and Tardis, and it lasted for 3 days from March 9th to March 11th.
The Alawite community was hit the hardest. They suffered over 1,300 deaths.
And while the focus was on the Alawites, Christians were also caught in the crossfire.
Open Doors reported that at least 4 Christians were killed, including a father.
And I think more than anything, the massacres shattered any illusion that the new government would be able to protect Christians.
They made all these promises about investigations and holding people accountable, but
there's a lot of skepticism, understandably so. I mean, they've heard empty promises before.
the international response has been pretty muted as well. There have been condemnations from some world leaders like U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
And the European Parliament expressed concern, but it doesn't seem like there's been any real action.
And that brings us back to that statement from the Free Burma Rangers team leader. The situation is worse now than under ISIS.
It's a chilling assessment, especially coming from someone who's been on the ground and has seen both situations firsthand.
Their point was that under ISIS, the threat was clear. You knew who the enemy was and what they were capable of.
But now with the fragmentation of power and all these different armed groups vying for control, the situation is much more chaotic and unpredictable.
There's a real fear that the March massacres could be just the beginning of a wider campaign of ethnic cleansing.
It's a terrifying thought, and it's one that's shared by many Syrian Christians.
So to sum it all up, we're looking at a very serious crisis that's threatening the very existence of Christianity in Syria.
We're talking about a massive decline in population, ongoing violence and persecution, economic hardship displacement. It's a multifaceted problem.
And it's one that's not getting nearly enough attention from the international community.
But it's important to highlight the work that humanitarian organizations are doing. Groups like Barnabas Aid, International Orthodox Christian Charities, Global Christian Relief Aid to the church in need now. Take Heart, International Christian Concern. They're all providing essential aid to Syrian Christians.
They're distributing food and medicine, offering shelter, providing trauma counseling. They're doing everything they can to help.
And the resilience of the Syrian Christian community is truly inspiring. Even in the face of all this adversity, they're still holding on to their faith. They're still working for peace.
They're a testament to the human spirit and its ability to overcome even the most difficult challenges.
We need our help. They need the world to pay attention to their plight and to take action.
This situation is a test case for religious freedom and pluralism in the Middle East.
If we allow Christianity to disappear from Syria, what does that say about our commitment to these values?
It's a question we all need to ask ourselves.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a few thoughts.
Please.
Think about the long history of Christianity in Syria. Think about what its potential disappearance would mean for the region, for the world.
It would be a tragedy not just for Christians, but for everyone who values diversity and freedom of religion.
And for those of you who are wondering what you can do to help, I urge you to check out the websites of the organizations we mentioned earlier.
They all have information on how you can donate, volunteer, or raise awareness.
Even a small act can make a difference.
And please share this episode with your friends and family. Let's get this story out there.
We also want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this crisis? What questions do you have?
Leave a comment below. Let's keep this conversation going.
It's important that we don't forget about the plight of Syrian Christians.
Their story is a reminder that religious freedom is a precious and fragile thing.
And it's something that we all need to fight for.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important to remember that this isn't just about Syria.
You're right. This is a global issue.
Persecution and discrimination are happening to religious minorities all over the world.
We need to stand in solidarity with all those who are suffering for their faith.
And we need to work together to build a world where everyone is free to practice their religion without fear.
That's a goal worth striving for.
It certainly is.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It was a pleasure to be here.
We'll see you next time.
Until then, take care.
And thanks for listening.
And for caring.